Hey AP World, I'm Miss Ziegler and I'm coming to you live from Westside High School in Houston, Texas today to talk to you about shifting powers. What's going on that will eventually lead to World War I? So you could say that this is somewhat of context for World War I. Grab your notebooks, get the link to the notes in the description below, and let's get started. Keep in mind, as we're going through this video, feel free to pause at any time that you need to in order to be able to get the notes. Let's start with Russia. Russia is in a bit of a turmoil, especially in 1905. The first thing you're going to put down in the internal problems box is Bloody Sunday. This happens January 22nd, 1905. Thousands of workers who are discontented with their working conditions march to protest peacefully and ask the Tsar to improve working conditions. However, the Tsar is not there that day, and his troops end up shooting into the marchers. They kill 1,300 marchers. This is so frustrating for those who were peacefully marching that it eventually leads to the Revolution of 1905, which results in strikes and around 400,000 workers who refuse to work. The Tsar tries to appease them, but many are killed and injured during this revolution. Another problem, this would be external, is the Russo-Japanese War from 1904 to 1905. Russia and Japan fight over Korea and Manchuria. Japan wins, and this is the first time that an East Asian state defeats a European power. Another external problem is World War I. Germany declares war on Russia in 1914. Russian troops, very poorly trained, and civilians will suffer extreme food shortages. All of these things will lead to further discontentment among the Russian citizens. I wanted to share with you a little bit about my trip to Russia. I was able to go to St. Petersburg in 2003. Feels like a lifetime ago. There I am in the throne room. That's where the Tsar would have sat for balls and things like that they had at one of the palaces called the Winter Palace. And here's a picture of one of the bedrooms inside the palace. You can see it is quite extravagant. This is one of the reasons that people were so upset, because all of this money was spent by the Tsar and all these fine things just for one family. And here they are starving to death during the war, and they feel as though he's not really taking care of things during the war. This will all lead up to more and more discontentment, which eventually leads to, wait for it, the Russian Revolution in 1917. We'll talk a little bit more in depth on this later, but the basics are the Bolsheviks, who are led by Lenin, take over and make the Tsar abdicate the throne. That means they force him out. Lenin then starts the Communist Party, and his goal is to eliminate private ownership. So he will take over after the Tsar is gone. More details on that later. All right, let's go to China now. Ethnic tension in China. What's going on in China is that the largest group are the Han, H-A-N, but they are ruled by the Qing dynasty, who are Manchu, M-A-N-C-H-U. They are from a region northwest of China. Many of the Han never really accept the Manchu rule because they look at them as outsiders. There's also this constant threat of famine. Rapid population growth leads to expansion of population, of course, but not the expansion of farmland or food output. And so any huge natural disaster would be a big problem and could cause thousands of deaths. So there's always this constant threat of that happening if something should go wrong. There's also a European presence in China. Now remember, up until the 18th century, China had been the world's leader in wealth. However, now Europe was getting wealthier due to the Industrial Revolution. So Europeans are beginning to branch out, and they want to trade with China. They're mostly interested in buying tea, porcelain, and silk, and they pay in silver. However, the Chinese don't really want anything that the Europeans manufacture because they look at the Chinese as uncivilized, which is ironic because that's how the Europeans looked at them. As a result, many Chinese would eventually support the empress in trying to get the foreigners out and fighting against the European invasion. This will eventually lead to the problems that we talked about, such as the Boxer Rebellion. But despite this support, the Qing dynasty collapses in 1911, and it will give way for the Chinese Republic. This is led by Sun Yat-sen. He takes over at the time. He is a Christian, but he wants to continue Confucian ideas. He has three principles in mind for how he would like to see China governed. The first one is democracy. Not democracy in the way that we're thinking. He was meaning more as though the country would be governed by experts. He also believes in nationalism, which is loyalty and patriotism to China. And he wants a better livelihood for the people of China, meaning he wants to end the unequal distribution of wealth and make sure it's distributed equally. Unfortunately, he doesn't have enough military power to do this, and he will later give up his power to the Chinese Nationalist Party. Let's go on to the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire, remember, is this vast multi-ethnic empire. During the time frame that we're talking about, the Young Turks come into play. They are a group of reformers who want Turkification, and I've got it right there for you so that you'll know how to spell it. And this is basically meaning they want to make all citizens identify as Turkish. This would be a challenge because remember, the empire is multi-ethnic and not all of the empire were Muslim. As a matter of fact, there were several Christians in Armenia. The Armenian Christians will be blamed for the country's problem and used as somewhat of a scapegoat. This will become a problem later and actually lead to the Armenian genocide. More details on that later as well. They were also having problems fighting foreign influence. They resented British and French for coming in and putting these policies on them in regards to trade and the economy. And that had also given them power within the empire. So because of this, they ally with Germany for World War I. Unfortunately for them, Germany loses World War I, and they're on the losing side of the war. Around this time, the Turkish national movement begins, and they're fighting for self-determination, which means this idea of a national identity or ruling themselves. They're led by Mustafa Kemal, this guy, and in this case, he wants the Republic of China. The Republic of Republic of China? No, scratch that. The Republic of Turkey. He wants that. He wants a republic, and it is formed in 1923. At that time, he brings about some reforms. One of them is that he wants to be a little bit more secular or worldly and less based on the Islamic faith. He also wants school for boys and girls, no more polygamy, and women's suffrage. Another reform he brings in is to dress in more Western ways. Even though he has these reforms, he rules for 15 years as a dictator and doesn't give up power until his death. And finally, let's talk about Mexico. In the 1900s, Mexico is independently ruled by the dictator named Diaz. He allows for foreign investors to come in. So at this time, the 1% own most of the wealth, and most of the rest of the people were poor peasants. So in 1910, Madero, this guy right over here, he's an opponent of Diaz, is jailed, and many are upset about this. However, he escapes and sets up forces to fight a revolution. The troops, who are led by Pancho Villa in support of Madero, defeat the troops of Diaz, who was the old dictator. They kick him out, and they start to make reforms. Another leader of this revolution, Emiliano Zapata, he redistributes the land, or at least starts to do that, in order to get the wealth across the board more equally. Unfortunately, there's political violence that continues for the next 10 years, and in about 1917, they adopt a new constitution. At that point, the Institutional Revolutionary Party is formed in 1929, and has dominated the Mexican political scene ever since. This guy right here is Madero. So just in case you want to know what he looks like. All right, that's it for the presentation today. I hope you were able to get those notes. Make sure you put them in your notebook, and I'll see you next time. The troops defeat Diaz. Then they're led by Pancho Villa to defeat. Okay, sorry. Let me rewind that. The troops are defeated.